welcome to the Atomic. Today, we'll be covering the second chapter, Movement and Substances. The contents of this video will mostly be aligned to Singapore O-Level syllabus. If any questions, feel free to leave it in the description box down below and I will do my best to answer them. So for this chapter, there's 3 key things we need to understand. First is diffusion. Second, osmosis. And finally, active transport. Diffusion is the net movement of particles from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration down a concentration gradient. In this case, the particles includes ions as well as molecules. So what does this actually mean? Well, let's imagine this. There are initially 4 drops of red dye on the left-hand side of the container. After some time, diffusion would then take place through this permeable membrane. Permeable membrane allows red dye to pass through it. Diffusion is allowed to take place because there's net movement of particles, in this case, red dye particles, from a region of higher concentration, which is the left-hand side of the container, to a region of lower concentration, which is the right-hand side of the container. After some time, there will be equal concentration of red dye in both sides of the membrane. Well, if there's more than one particle, in this case, red dye particle and green dye particle, these particles will diffuse independently from each other. So concentration gradient is a difference in concentration between 2 regions. Concentration gradient is just one factor affecting diffusion. Steeper the concentration gradient, faster diffusion can take place. Particles are allowed to move because they possess kinetic energy. They will continue to move until they are evenly spaced out from each other. So here's a little recap on the previous chapter on cells. Cell surface membrane is a partially permeable membrane. So this means it's able to regulate the substances moving in and out from it. While some substances are able to pass through it, like oxygen and carbon dioxide, other particles are unable to do so, like proteins. So in this case, red dye particles are just like proteins that are able to pass through this partially permeable membrane, while blue dye particles are like carbon dioxide and oxygen that are able to pass through this partially permeable membrane. So from this, we learn that in diffusion, only some substances can pass across the cell surface membrane. Next, osmosis. Osmosis is the net movement of water molecules from a solution of higher water potential to a solution with lower water potential through a partially permeable membrane. So for this, it's important for us to note that osmosis relates water and water molecules. And this partially permeable membrane is just like the cell surface membrane from the previous slide. This partially permeable membrane is permeable to water, but not to other substances like sucrose. In osmosis, only water molecules move, not solid particles. Water molecules will move from a region with higher water potential, like the 10% red dye solution, to a region with lower water potential, like the 20% red dye solution. However, in this case, red dye particles do not move. Only the blue water molecules will move. This will eventually take place until both regions will have the same water potential. So at the bottom of the slide, you see 2 U-tubes. Originally, on the left-hand side, we can see that the U-tubes have the same water level on both sides, although the red dye concentration is different. However, as water molecules move during osmosis, this water level will therefore change. As water molecules move from a region of higher water potential, which is the right-hand side, to a region of lower water potential, which is the left-hand side, we can see the left-hand side water level rising while the right-hand side water level dropping. Water potential is a term consistently used together with osmosis. Hence, it's important for us to fully understand the key word. Water potential is a measure of tendency of water to move from a place to another place. A diluted solution has more water molecules per unit volume than a concentrated one. Hence, it has a higher water potential, as water molecules have a greater tendency to move away from it into a region with lower water potential. osmosis can affect plant cells and animal cells differently. So first, animal cells. When animal cells is placed into a solution with higher water potential, water molecules will move from the solution into the animal cell. It does not have a cell wall like the plant cell to keep its shape. Hence, animal cell will start to expand, causing it to increase in size. And after increasing past a certain size, the animal cell may swell and burst. When animal cells are placed into a solution with the same water potential as the cell cytoplasm, there will be no change in the size and shape, but osmosis still takes place just at the same rate. When animal cells are placed into a solution with lower water potential, water molecules will move from a region of higher water potential, which is the cytoplasm of the animal cell, into a region of lower water potential, which is the solution. The cell will start to shrink, and little spikes will start to appear on the cell surface membrane. This process is known as crenation. The cell will then become dehydrated and will eventually die. So how does osmosis affect plant cells? Cells that, which is the vacuole, have a lower water potential. Hence, water molecules will enter the cell through the cell surface membrane. As these water molecules enter, vacuoles will increase in size and push the cytoplasm against the cell wall. The cell does not burst because it is protected by the cell wall, which is inelastic. The cell will start to expand and become turgid. The pressure exerted by the water in the vacuole on the cell wall is also known as turgor pressure. When a plant cell is placed into a solution with the same water potential as the solution, there will be no net change in the size and shape of the plant cell. When the plant cell is placed into a solution with lower water potential, it will then decrease in size. This is because water molecules will leave the cell into solution by osmosis through this partially permeable membrane, also known as the cell surface membrane. As the cell loses water, the vacuole will then decrease in size. The cytoplasm will shrink away from the cell wall. This process is also known as plasmolysis. The plant cell can return to its original state when placed into a solution with higher water potential. The cell will therefore decrease in size and can become limp or flaccid. A key thing to consider in cells is its surface area to volume ratio. Nutrients and waste material move across the cell's surface membrane, and the rate at which these substances move was therefore dependent on this ratio. That's why cells remain so small. This is to ensure that the rate of movement of substances across the membrane is still efficient. The volume increases at a faster rate, so when the cell increases in size, the volume increases at a faster rate compared to the surface area. Hence, the surface area to volume ratio will therefore decrease, and the rate of movement of substances across this membrane will also decrease. Cells that are responsible for absorption, like root hair cells, are also modified in terms of their shape, so that they can increase this surface area to volume ratio. Like a square has a lower surface area to volume ratio than a rectangle. And finally, we have active transport, a process in which energy is used to move particles or substances across a membrane against its concentration gradient. This means that particles move from a region of lower concentration to higher concentration. So an example of active transport is in root hair cells. Mineral salts can be obtained either through diffusion or active transport. It's also important to note that active transport only can take place in living cells. This is because active transport requires energy in the form of ATP, and this can be obtained through respiration. Thank you. We've come to the end of this chapter, and I hope you've understood movement of substances. Bye-bye!